The letter arrived on a Tuesday. It was handwritten on yellow legal paper, 3 pages, front and back, in the cramped and careful handwriting of a man who had taken a long time to write it. The return address was a Veterans Administration hospital in Louisville, Kentucky. The letter was addressed to Muhammad Ali, care of his manager's office in Chicago, and whoever opened the mail that morning set it aside in the stack marked "Personal," which meant it would eventually reach Ali directly rather than being answered by a staff member. Most letters in that stack took weeks. This one reached Ali the same afternoon. He read it twice. What was in that letter has never been published in full. The man who wrote it, a former Army sergeant named Raymond Hicks, who had served 2 tours in Vietnam and come home to a country that had largely decided it did not want to think about what had happened over there, gave one interview years later in which he described its contents in general terms. He said he had written about the war, about what he had seen and done and could not stop seeing and doing in his sleep, about the years of trying to drink it quiet and finding that it got louder, about the wife who had left and the job he could not hold, and the apartment in Louisville where he had been living alone for 8 months, about the gun he had purchased 3 weeks earlier and the specific and detailed plan he had made for a specific night that was, when he wrote the letter, 4 days away. He said he did not know why he wrote to Muhammad Ali. He had been a boxing fan once, before the war, when being a fan of anything had still felt possible. He had watched Ali fight on a black and white television in his parents' living room when he was 14 years old, and he had never entirely forgotten that feeling. The feeling of watching someone do something so completely outside the ordinary range of human possibility that it made the world briefly seem larger than it usually did. He said he wrote the letter because he needed to write it to someone, and Ali was the person his hand reached for. He did not expect a response. He said he was not sure, when he sealed the envelope and put it in the mail, that he expected to be alive when a response could have arrived. He was wrong about that. Ali showed up at Raymond Hicks's apartment at 11:47 at night, 4 days after the letter was postmarked. He had flown to Louisville that afternoon. He had gotten the address from the Veterans Administration, which required a phone call, and according to people who were aware of the sequence of events, a degree of personal persuasion that Ali was uniquely positioned to apply. He had told no one where he was going except for one person in his immediate circle who drove him from the airport to the address. He had brought nothing with him except himself, no cameras, no publicist, no manager. He knocked on the door of apartment 14B at 11:47 at night and stood in the hallway and waited. Raymond Hicks, who had been sitting in his kitchen with the lights off, heard the knock and did not move for a long time. He told the interviewer that his first thought was that it was his neighbor, who sometimes knocked when things got loud, though things had not been loud that night. His second thought was that he was not going to answer it. He had been sitting in that dark kitchen for 4 hours, and he had been thinking very specific thoughts, and he did not want to be interrupted. The knock came again, and then a voice came through the door, a voice that Hicks said he recognized before his mind had fully processed that it was possible to be recognizing it. Because it was not a voice you forgot once you had heard it. It was the voice of Muhammad Ali. Ali said through the closed door, "Raymond, I got your letter. Can I come in?" Hicks told the interviewer that he did not remember crossing the kitchen. He did not remember his hand on the door handle. He remembered the door being open and Muhammad Ali standing in the hallway of his apartment building in Louisville, Kentucky at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, looking at him with an expression that Hicks said he had never in his life seen on another person's face. Not pity, not the practiced sympathy of someone performing concern. Something else. Something that Hicks, after years of trying to find the right word for it, eventually described simply as recognition. As though Ali was looking at him and seeing him entirely. Not the veteran, not the broken man, not the problem to be solved, but the actual specific human being who had written 3 pages on yellow legal paper because his hand had reached for someone to tell. Ali said, "Are you going to make me stand in the hallway all night?" Hicks stepped back from the door. What happened in that apartment over the next 4 hours has been reconstructed from Hicks's interview and from the account of the person who drove Ali that night, who waited in the car downstairs, and who spoke to a journalist a decade later. Neither account is complete. Neither person was in the room for all of it. But what they described, together, forms a picture that is coherent and specific enough to understand. Ali sat down at Raymond Hicks's kitchen table. He did not immediately address the letter or the gun or the plan. He asked Hicks about Vietnam, not in the way that people who had not been there asked about it, not the questions that were really about their own discomfort, the questions designed to be answered briefly so the subject could be changed. He asked specific questions, and he waited for complete answers, and when Hicks answered, he listened in the way that very few people had listened to Hicks since he came home. Hicks told the interviewer that this was the thing that undid him first, not any particular thing Ali said, but the quality of being listened to, of having his experience treated as something worth taking the full time to hear. They talked about the war for a long time. Ali had his own relationship to Vietnam, the refusal, the conviction, the years of exile from boxing, the Supreme Court. He did not compare his experience to Hicks's. He was clear about the difference, specific about it. He said, "You went, I didn't. You went because you were told to go and you were 22 years old, and nobody gave you the whole picture of what you were going into. And then you came home, and the country that sent you wanted to pretend you'd never left. That is not the same thing as what happened to me. But I know something about what it costs to be used by a system and then discarded by it." Hicks told the interviewer that he had not cried since he came home from the war, had not been able to, had lived for years in a kind of emotional freeze that the therapists at the VA had various clinical names for, and none of them had been able to thaw. He cried in his kitchen that night. He said he was not sure exactly when it started, somewhere in the middle of Ali talking, somewhere in the middle of being heard, and he did not stop for a long time. Ali did not tell him to stop. He did not offer reassurance. He sat at the table and he let it happen, and he was still there when it was over. At some point, late in the night, Ali asked about the gun, not where it was, not to take it. He asked Hicks to tell him about the plan, to describe it out loud, in words, to another person. Hicks said this was the hardest thing Ali asked him to do, and also the most important. He said that when he heard himself saying the words, describing the specific steps of the specific plan he had made, with the specific date he had chosen, it sounded different than it had sounded inside his head. It sounded like the plan of a man who was in tremendous pain and had run out of other ideas, which was what it was. But inside his head, it had sounded like logic. Outside, spoken to someone who was sitting across a kitchen table listening, it sounded like something else. "You wrote to me because some part of you was still looking for another idea." Ali paused. "I'm here because that part was right." They talked until almost 4 in the morning. At some point Hicks made coffee. At some point they moved from the kitchen to the small living room and sat in the 2 chairs that faced the window. The city was quiet outside. At one point, Ali talked about his own fears, not the carefully curated version of Ali's inner life that appeared in interviews, but something more unguarded, more specific. He talked about what it had felt like during the years his license was suspended, when he could not fight and his identity had been forcibly separated from the thing that organized his sense of himself. He said, "I don't know if it's the same thing, but I know what it is to not be able to see a way forward. I know what that dark looks like. And I'm telling you from the other side of it, the dark ends, not on a schedule, not when you feel ready for it to end, but it ends." Before he left, Ali asked Hicks for the gun. He did not demand it. He asked for it the way you ask for something that belongs to someone else, and that you have no right to take, but that you need them to choose to give. Hicks told the interviewer that he went to the bedroom and got it from the nightstand drawer, and he stood in the hallway of his own apartment, holding it for a moment, thinking about everything it had meant to him over the past 3 weeks. And then he gave it to Ali. Ali put it in his jacket pocket. He said, "I'm going to get rid of this, not because you can't be trusted with it, because you don't need it anymore." He left at 4:14 in the morning. The person waiting in the car said Ali got in and sat in the passenger seat for a moment without saying anything. Then he said, "He's going to be okay. Let's go." Raymond Hicks was alive the next morning, and the morning after that. He called the VA that week and made an appointment, the first one he had kept in over a year. He stayed alive. He eventually remarried. He eventually found work that used the things his service had built in him: the discipline, the attention to detail, the ability to function under conditions that unmade other people, rather than the things it had damaged. He lived for 34 more years after that night in the apartment. He died in 2009, at 61 years old, from causes unrelated to that night or the war. His daughter gave the interview in which the full story was finally told. She said her father had talked about it throughout her childhood and into her adulthood, not obsessively, not as a wound he kept reopening, but as a fact he considered central to who he was. That Muhammad Ali had come to his door, that he had been heard, that the dark had ended. Ali was asked about Raymond Hicks only once, in a brief exchange with a journalist in the early 1980s. The journalist had heard a version of the story and asked about it directly. Ali looked at him for a moment and then said, "I don't talk about things like that. If it happened, it's between me and the person it happened with, and it's none of anybody else's business." The journalist pressed. Ali said, "A man's life is his own. What he does with it is what matters. What anybody helped him see is between him and them. That's all I'm going to say about it." That is all Ali ever said about it. But Raymond Hicks said more. In the interview his daughter arranged, a few years before he died, Hicks said that the thing he had never been able to fully explain to anyone, not his wife, not his therapist, not his children, was why the knock on the door had worked when nothing else had. Why a voice through a closed door at 11:47 at night had done what years of professional intervention had not. He said he had thought about it for a long time, and the best answer he had found was this: that the knock was not a treatment. It was not a program or a protocol or a resource. It was a person, a specific person who had read a specific letter written by a specific man and gotten on a plane. And that specificity, the fact that it was not a service or a system, but a human being who had decided on his own that this particular life mattered enough to cross the country in the middle of the night for, was the thing that broke through. Because what Raymond Hicks had stopped being able to feel, in the long, dark years since the war, was that his life was particular, that he was not interchangeable, that his specific existence, as opposed to the general category of veteran or patient or broken man, had weight. Muhammad Ali showed up at his door and gave him that back, in the only way it can actually be given, which is not through words alone, but through action, through presence, through a knock on a door at 11:47 at night that said, "I read your letter. I came. You matter." If this story moved you, share it today, and leave a comment. Has anyone ever shown up for you in the dark? Because that is what Muhammad Ali was underneath everything else the world saw. The man who showed up. And sometimes that is the only thing that matters. There is a version of Muhammad Ali that the world knows completely. The version that floated like a butterfly and stung like a bee. The version that stood in Houston in 1967 and refused to step forward. The version that went to Zaire and knocked out George Foreman in a fight that nobody who covered boxing thought he could win. The version that lit the Olympic flame in Atlanta with trembling hands and made an entire stadium catch its breath. That version is real, and it is documented, and it belongs to history in the fullest sense of the word. But there is another version, The version that moved through the world in the gaps between the public moments, in the middle of the night, in the quiet spaces where the cameras could not follow and the journalists were not present, and the only witnesses were the people directly involved. This version of Ali is harder to document and easier to overlook. But the people who encountered it, the people who received the phone calls, who opened the doors, who found themselves on the other side of an Ali who was not performing anything for anyone, those people knew something that the public record does not fully capture. They knew that the public Ali and the private Ali were not two different people. They were the same person, operating at the same level of intensity and intention, with and without an audience. Raymond Hicks knew it. He knew it from the moment that voice came through his closed door and said his name. Not Muhammad Ali the champion, not Muhammad Ali the activist, just a man who had read a letter and come a long way to knock on a door. The simplest possible gesture, the most human possible action. I read what you wrote, I came. You're not alone in this. That was the whole message, that was everything, and it was enough. Ali once said that he believed every person was put on earth to be useful to other people. That fame was not something you owned, but something you were given in trust, on the understanding that you would use it in the service of something larger than yourself. Most people who say things like that mean them in the abstract. Ali meant it in the specific. He meant it as an operational principle. He meant it as the thing you did when a letter arrived on a Tuesday, and the return address was a VA hospital, and the man who wrote it was 4 days from the end of everything. You read the letter. You got on a plane. You knocked on the door. There is one more thing Hicks's daughter said in that interview. She said that every year, on the anniversary of that Tuesday night, her father would go quiet. Not sad. Quiet in a different way. The way a person gets quiet when they are holding something carefully. She asked him about it once, when she was old enough to ask. He told her that on that date, every year, he thought about what the night had almost been and what it had instead become. He thought about the knock. He thought about the voice. He thought about the cup of coffee he had made at some point after midnight in his own kitchen. An act so ordinary it was almost absurd against the backdrop of what the night had been, and how the ordinariness of it had felt like the beginning of something, like proof that ordinary life was still available, that the morning was still coming, that the specific and irreplaceable fact of him, Raymond Hicks, Sergeant, 2 tours, Louisville, Kentucky, still had somewhere to be. She said he never stopped being grateful for the knock. He carried it every day of the 34 years he was given, and he died knowing that the man who had come to his door had changed the entire shape of the world he left behind. He saw it about the cup of coffee. He saw it about the morning that came. And every year, quietly, he said thank you to the man who knocked. Every single day.